Hey everyone, in the video I made recently about the great drummer Cliff Leeman, I mentioned that I have a few pieces of equipment that belong to him. So I wanted to talk about those for the few people in the world who might be interested in this. So I have a drumstick, a splash cymbal, and a snare drum that belong to Cliff. So I'm going to talk about the snare drum in a separate video because there's probably the most to talk about with the snare drum. It has the most features to it. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the drumstick and the splash cymbal. And these were given to me by my friend Al White. And Al is a great guy, a huge jazz fan, and also Al is a drummer. And he knew Cliff Leeman very well. They were friends. And over the years, Cliff gave a few things to Al. And I met Al while touring with Ed Pulser. We became friends. We talked a lot about Cliff. And Al ended up giving me to these. So it was a very generous gift. And thank you again, Al. And so I'm happy to be able to show these to you and to talk about them. The drumstick is a Slingerland Cliff Leeman model. And it's 15.5 inches long, so a little shorter than standard, 16 inches, or at least that's standard now. Years ago, even in the 60s and 70s, there were still a lot of sticks. It was common to find sticks that were shorter than 16 inches. It's not as common now, but definitely a lot more players played a slightly shorter stick back then. I think when rock came in, the sticks started getting a little longer for more leverage. That's just my guess. But it definitely used to be more common. And in fact, Jake Hanna, in the years that I knew him, which were maybe the last 10 or 11 years of his life, he was using a drumstick made by the company Capella. He was using the Capella Buddy Rich stick. And that was 16 inches long, but Jake would cut a little bit off the back end. When I visited Jake's home in LA, he showed me, he had his workbench and he would cut a little bit off the back of those sticks to make them a little bit under 16 inches. And speaking of Capella, they may well have made this stick because they definitely made sticks for Slingerland as well. And this has a feel of one of their sticks, but I'm not sure. It has a round tip. I believe Joe Jones also liked to use a stick with a more rounded tip. I've heard that Dave Tuff did as well. I'm sure a lot of these players used all different things. I don't know how married they were to any of these exact specifications. Gene Krupa liked a stick that had more of an arrow tip. Some players had sticks that were more of an oval or a barrel-shaped tip. So that's the Slingerland Cliff Leeman model. And I should mention that I've seen pictures of Cliff using what appear to be this model stick, but I've also seen pictures of him using something very different from this. I've seen pictures of him using these metal drumsticks, not a heavy metal practice drumstick that you use on a practice pad. Some drummers will use those on a pad to build up strength. You couldn't use them on a drum set, you'd break everything, but Louis Bellson and Gene Krupa would practice with these metal sticks, and Sam Ulano, a good friend of mine, a very well-known drum teacher, his whole method was based on playing on a practice pad with these very heavy metal drumsticks. But these other ones that Cliff used, Verasonic, I think they're called, and I think they're still around, they were made for playing on a drum set, and they were metal, but they were much lighter. I think they were made of aluminum. And you would recognize them immediately if you've ever seen them because they came in different colors. They'd be in blue or yellow or black. And they all had these white plastic tips, but it wasn't just the tip that was plastic. It was sort of this white plastic sheath that came down over the taper of the stick. And then there'd also be a white plastic cap at the back end. So I've definitely seen photos of Cliff using those. I tried them once. They didn't work for me at all. And it's a very different type of thing than this, but I just want to mention I've definitely seen Cliff using those as well. So I guess that's about it to say about the drumstick, but this was actually played by Cliff and owned by him, so it's a pretty cool thing to have, and I'm very lucky to have it. The splash cymbal Cliff always liked to use an 8-inch splash cymbal. I talked about this a lot in the other video, just the way he would use it, putting it in just in the right spot for the music. He's one of the few drummers, I feel, who really knew how to make appropriate musical use of a splash cymbal. It's easy to get carried away, but he always put it in the perfect spot. And this is a Zildjian cymbal. Cliff played Zildjian, as did pretty much everybody back then. This is from the 70s, and I weighed it before doing this. It's 142 grams. And now for the bad news, which is that this cymbal is actually not playable because Cliff cracked it. And you can probably see this. The crack goes about halfway around the bell. It goes from here all the way around to here. So if you were to really strike this with a stick, the whole bell would probably just fall out. And I've been advised, I was hoping that I could get it repaired when I first got it, but I was advised by some very good repair people that any attempt to fix it would probably just destroy the cymbal. Usually you can get a crack drilled out, but because this crack is so big and the cymbal is so small and thin, trying to drill it out, again, the whole bell would probably just fall out. So unfortunately it's not playable, but it was cracked by Cliff Leeman, so that's cool in and of itself. You can hear the buzzing from the crack. But again, it's just a very cool thing to have, and thank you again to Al White for these. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, just let me know, and like I said, I will do a separate video about the snare drum, a Slingerland snare drum. And then just for fun, I have a few records here. This one I talked about before, Jammin' at Condon's. This is a great record. Some of my all-time favorite moments in music are on this recording, and it also has this fantastic cover. There's Cliff Leeman's foot playing the bass drum. Al White also told me that Cliff told him that Cliff had vodka and orange juice in this thermos. So that's a nice piece of inside information. Thank you again, Al. And you can see that Cliff has his pant leg rolled up so the beater doesn't get caught. Jake Hanna also always used to do that. He's wearing these Capezio dance shoes that he liked to wear when he played. I believe Joe Jones did that as well. And I've seen this photo mislabeled as being George Wettling actually, but it's definitely Cliff, and you can see his Radio King drums there. He's got some moleskin on the bass drum. He has a wooden beater, and it's hard to see this pedal, but this is the duplex Hain pedal, same type of pedal that George Wettling liked to use. So this is a fantastic recording. I cannot recommend it highly enough. And then another one of my favorites that I forgot to mention for some reason in the other video, but Bobby Hackett live at the Roosevelt Grill with Vic Dickinson. And this is just a fantastic band with Jack Lesberg and Dave McKenna. They made a few volumes, they're all great, but this is my favorite. And this is just another great example to hear Cliff just swinging. You can really hear his incredible ride cymbal beat. I had mentioned in the other video that he would sometimes switch cymbals a little bit before a new soloist would take over and kind of get the sound prepared for the next soloist. You can definitely hear him doing that on both of these recordings actually. You can really hear him doing that. And on this one, you get to hear him play very, very nice, subtle bossa nova, which you don't hear a lot. And also just some very wild fours that he takes on here. Actually, years ago, I listened to this recording with someone, and he felt that Cliff was dragging a bit on his fours. But what it sounds like to me is that on some of his fours, he'll pull back on the time a little, but then when the band comes back in and he goes back to the cymbal, it's right there. The time doesn't actually move. He's actually, to me, he's doing something very deep with the time, something that would be more associated with, I don't want to say more modern players, but definitely it's an avant-garde thing, this sort of elastic time that you can play with, but it actually doesn't move. So check that out. It's a very hip, a very deep thing. So there you go. Again, if you have any questions about any of this, please let me know, and I will do the full video about the snare drum soon and talk about that. And I guess that's it for now. Thanks a lot.